The Fantasmagorium show presents Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. Well, some of us have tickets in hand for No Time to Die. We are 2.5 weeks away, and I think this movie may actually premiere. Today, however, we look back at the ugly stepchild of the Craig era with Quantum of Solace. I am Scotty. My opposite number is Catherine, and Steve's in Bolivia. Hey, Kat.
Hey.
What is going on, and when was the last time you watched Quantum of Solace?
I just finished watching it a few minutes ago.
Me too. I was, you know what? And I was somewhat pleasantly surprised. I haven't revisited this one in a little while. And the only thing I will say right off the hop is I thought that there was sort of a denouement to Casino Royale. But wait, we get second denouement to Casino Royale.
Yeah. And speaking of Casino Royale, since we didn't really finish our discussion about it last week, I was wondering, from the start of that movie, it seemed like they initially intended that to just be the only, like the origin story. That's it, we're done. And then they were probably going to go back into doing standalones. And then because I never got the vibe at the end of that movie that it was going to pick up with, interrogating Mr. White and finding out about all of his people. I figured, okay, Bond's caught him. Lashif was just a freelance terrorist banker. It's over. So I didn't know from the marketing that this was going to be like a direct sequel. So when I'm watching as I'm watching Casino, I'm like, everything I liked about this movie, like the pacing, the acting, the fact that it's a character study, the chemistry between Bond and Vesper, like all of this stuff is working. And I'm thinking, this will be really great when they get around to using the same type of pacing and structure for, the next one as they start seeking into a more classic type of Bond story. But then they didn't really. It didn't really end up going that way. But like Casino Royale, the reason it's my favorite Bond is that I love the cinematography. Of course, the image quality is going to look a lot better. The fact that the centerpiece of that film is just a card game, and yet I never got bored with it, which is nuts. You compare that to the middle 38 minutes or so of any other Bond movie, and you'll have a ton of stuff happening, like a lot of plot. And that movie did not have that. And yet I never missed it. And you come out of that movie thinking, wow, they've cracked the code. It's like they know they can make a Bond movie where you're focusing more on Bond than you are on the plot and all the other stuff. We'll never have to have a screw-up movie again. And then, yeah.
Well, and yeah. Now, to be fair, and just to address what you said in terms of the conclusion to Casino Royale, which we all thought was going to be the conclusion to Casino Royale, both at the end of the movie and at the end of last week. I thought it was a perfect encapsulation of a 21st century Bond with great acting, great cinematography, pacing, everything. And a lot of the stuff. I remember hearing in an interview after or during the promotion for Quantum of Solace that Austin Powers had essentially screwed the James Bond formula because they had parodied pretty much everything. And so I was pleasantly surprised with Casino Royale because it wasn't the case. And I think it's also something that is applied to Daniel Craig as being the dour James Bond or the more realistic James Bond is because he doesn't have that sort of wit and flippancy that you've seen in previous Bonds. But again, I think that was addressed by Daniel Craig himself when he said that it was essentially when you cannot do those cliches or tropes simply because they'd been parodied for so long, considering the age of the franchise.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was bothered by, because as I mentioned last week, you'll find no bigger Bond fan than Mike Myers. He wouldn't have made those 3 Austin Powers movies if he hated the franchise. So The idea that, and it's not like those older Bond films depreciated as a result of those 3 movies. So, I mean, I know what Cary Fukunaga said a couple weeks ago about there not being a simple plug-and-play formula is, for the most part, true. But I think in this case that it would have helped if they leaned on it a bit because, Casino Royale was November 2006. They greenlit the sequel in January 2007 and wanted it out by May 2008. And the first 3 directors they asked are like, no, that's like insanely fast turnaround time. They got the message and rescheduled it for November 2008. That was still too fast. And because word was coming down the pipeline that there might be a writer's strike and they have no idea how long that was going to last, they just rushed Purvis and Wade through the script and then they rushed Paul Haggis through it. and Haggis actually finished his script polish 2 hours before the strike started. And as Barbara mentioned in the documentary last week, yep, he finished his polish, he turned in his script, and then he picked up his check and went outside and joined the picket line. It's great. So it's like, well, all the signs seem to be saying maybe they should wait, but I guess they were afraid that it could get pushed back too far and they would lose the momentum, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that had happened in between No Time to Die, or not No Time to Die, Die Another Day, pardon me, and Casino Royale. It had happened between License to Kill and GoldenEye, so it's somewhat strange for them to think that it is a franchise that could possibly fade from the zeitgeist just because it has taken hiatuses so many times. It's changed actors. It's changed filmmaking, for the love of Pete. What people understand as the character is no longer necessarily associated with the actor. That was pretty much James Bond to begin with in one of these blockbuster movies. And you could argue that James Bond made the blockbuster. And yeah, James Bond movies are ridiculously expensive. So maybe pushing it back a little more would have been good, Babs. Or Mike. I don't know who makes these decisions.
That's kind of an interesting what-if type scenario. It's like, if they had delayed it, let's say if they had scheduled it for November 2009 to begin with, then the writer's strike happens, and I think if memory serves, the writer's strike ended by the end of like February 2008 or something. It lasted like 3 or 4 months. And then by that point, MGM was starting to get into bankruptcy. But because they had already prepaid for everything for the budget for Quantum of Solace, they were able to film it. Whereas had they pushed it, whereas if they had decided on a November 2009 release date to begin with, that would not have happened. Meaning it would have got caught up in not just the writer's strike delay, but also the bankruptcy delay. When they didn't emerge from bankruptcy till late 2010, meaning the earliest you would have seen it was November 2011, which makes me wonder, would Bond fans have been fine waiting 5 years for his second movie if, by all accounts, it most likely would have been a much better movie? And that would also mean they wouldn't get Skyfall, because Sam Mendes said a lot of the plot points in Skyfall were what they were specifically because he knew it was going to be released for the 50th anniversary, which would not have happened if Quantum had made a November 2011 release, which would have been the earliest after the bankruptcy thing they would have gotten out of it. So that kind of makes an interesting type of snowball effect if they had actually taken their time with this one to begin with, which is why I feel that the decision to pull the trigger and go through on this movie had everything to do with why this movie and then the two that follow have turned, and eventually No Time to Die, have turned out the way they have.
Well, and I think the idea of making Quantum a direct sequel to Casino Royale has certainly informed the franchise moving forward after that with Skyfall, and like everything has been sort of, the architect of your pain, so to speak. So it is, I don't know. But also I don't know if as a Bond fan, I would have been really curious and frustrated as to why you would introduce a new James Bond and then wait 5 more years to make the second in the Bond series. I can understand 3 years, 4 years, but to do that, and I think a lot has to be put on the writer's strike, and this, another one of my underappreciated gems, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, was a victim of that as well. And so I don't know. The what if is interesting, but for one, I think that would have been the moment where there may have been a dip.
Yeah, not as big of a dip as a later film in the Craig era, but we'll get to that later.
Yes, we will. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So Quantum, and also before we get into this, because I want to get it right off the hop, Robert Forster as director. Was it Robert Forster? Mark Forster. Mark Forster. Robert Forster is
an actor.
Yes, wrong guy. But Mark Forster as director, how did you feel about the directing of this film? Or are you going to cover it in the synopsis?
The directing is not good because I've seen his other movies and they're not as insane with with all the cuts and everything, and we'll get into that. And so, and
the only reason I bring it up in terms of the directing is because I noticed the directing, the flourishes of it, and you could tell, like, because of the runtime of this film as being only 96 minutes, it is the shortest Bond flick, isn't it?
1 hour 46 minutes, and the movie itself is about an hour 41, with the last 5 being credits.
Right. Okay. And so, hour and 41. It is the shortest, though.
Yes.
And it with the sort of insert shots that we'll get to, it felt like he was like, just let's stretch this out because we don't have enough story, or
So Daniel Craig revealed in a December 2011 interview on BBC Radio that because of the writer's strike, they couldn't get any writers to work on it, and because they weren't satisfied with the script to begin with because it was so rushed, that they had to per whatever the rules are, they were the only ones allowed to work on the script. And because they're not good at writing dialogue and more emotional driven scenes, they decided, well, we'll retcon this story to being a direct sequel, which originally it was not. And we'll phrase the story to be Bond is upset. He's, humiliated at being betrayed. He's still angry at these people who took all that stuff away from him. And that's going to be a more rage-driven story, which is why one of the themes in the movie is M constantly harping on Bond for, killing all their leads, so to speak. And that's how it became a more action-driven story. But Forster also said that after watching Casino Royale, it's not that he thought it was slow, but he felt that the next movie should unfold like a speeding bullet, like a really fast, never lets up type movie, which helps contribute to that as well. But there are good ways you can make a movie go fast-paced, and there's bad ways you can make it go fast-paced. And he actually does a little bit of both here. We'll get into that as well.
All right. Is there anything that you want to touch off as sort of a prologue, or shall we?
Well, prologue, there's no gun barrel again at the start of this movie because they're trying to make the case that, since this is a direct sequel, we're continuing the origin story, so we'll save the gun barrel for the end. Oh, okay, whatever.
And it makes sense. Like I almost kind of wish I had watched Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace back to back again. Like just watched them both so I could see the whole story. Watched Casino Royale, but didn't watch Quantum right after. And I have not yet done that double bill. Have you?
I've done it many times.
Does it hold up?
It's still jarring because Bond's performance in this movie, supposedly the whole thing is that he is still angry. He doesn't want to admit it, but he is. But because he does the whole stoic, sour thing you're talking about, where he tries to be deadly serious all the time, I'm not really feeling the type of rage and anguish that he's supposed to be feeling. So it does feel a little mismatched.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So no gun barrel.
No, the film opens with what is admittedly a gorgeous shot across Lake Garda, which is a little south of Lake Como in Italy. And you have this big car chase between Bond has got his Aston Martin, and all these guys are chasing him. And again, when I first saw this movie, I didn't realize it was a direct sequel to Casino Royale. So since I didn't know what the story was, I wasn't really invested in what was happening. There's an insane amount of cuts to the point that there's no point in trying to describe the logistics of what happens in this car chase.
The geography.
Right,
the geography was impossible.
After I saw this movie the first time, I knew there'd be no point in seeing it again because I would have to see it so many times to figure out what's actually going on. That's like, you know what? I'll just wait for the DVD. So anyway, they're driving through the tunnels of Lake Garda. Then they're driving through this rock quarry, which was actually filmed much farther south. They stitch it together, which is kind of neat. And it's a shame because this looks like it was choreographed rather well, but because of all the quick cuts and the shaky cam on top of that, just makes it horrible to watch.
Mm-hmm.
The chase and the idea is that Mr. White's bodyguards are chasing Bond. Now, I don't know where they were when Bond went to kidnap Mr. White at the end of the last movie, but suddenly they're here. So maybe they were on lunch break. So Bond gets past all the bad guys, loses his car door in the process. He ends up in Siena, Italy, which is several hundred miles south of Lake Como. Mm-hmm. And he pulls into what I guess is supposed to be some on-location type safe house. For some reason, M is there, and it's like, it wouldn't have been better to just drive to whatever airport or probably unofficial airstrip that they were at and just extradite the guy and take him back. But no, we're going to have this very awkward interrogation underneath this, looks like a really old building and some catacombs or like water canal things. And they keep
first thing Bond says, because they had to get medical attention for him. I guess they could have done that on the plane, but the first thing he says after it's time to get out is, "Don't let him bleed to death."
Okay, I guess I must have missed that. So this whole scene, this interrogation is being intercut with like this race that's about to happen above ground, and
horse race. A horse race.
And obviously the tension is that we know that when they, wave the flag, that's when the shit's going to hit the fan. They make a point of M and Bond greeting one of the guards named Mitchell. He's like, oh, I'm going to check the perimeter. Everything's going to be fine. So they're interrogating Mr. White, and M's like, oh, the longer you don't tell us what we want to know, the more painful we'll make it. And he just starts laughing at him. He's like, man, we always thought you guys were on top of it, but it turns out you don't even know we exist. And I was watching this, and my first thought was, maybe he's bluffing, because he just wants to seem more important and doesn't want Bond to just, dispose of him right there. But he eventually says this line that, the first thing you should know about us is we have people everywhere. Am I right? And Mitchell pulls out a gun. He starts shooting, and there's a shot where I legit thought that M got shot.
Me too.
Yeah, because apparently what happened is he shot the IV pole, and there's actually a very tiny spark, but you can't really see it unless you freeze frame it or know it's there. So I thought he shot M. It looked like he shot Mr. White because he falls out of his chair.
He did. Because he comes back to the puddle of blood that's on the floor.
Okay. So he shoots another one of the guards that was there, and then Bond turns around and sees M running out the back way. He thinks Mr. White's dead, so he chases this guy down. And I actually kind of like this chase sequence. Admittedly, once they get into the crowd, that's where the fast cutting and the shaky cam gets too much, and I can't really see what's going on. Eventually, they get onto the rooftops, and they have this neat fight up the bell tower, and they fall through what was admittedly a bit of a CG shot, where the camera's following them as they're both falling down into this building that's like under construction, and they get tangled in the ropes, and they swing around to almost like a ballet. And Bond ends up getting the gun and shooting the guy at the last second.
The money trailer shot.
Yes.
But also, and before we move forward, at the very beginning, when they're talking, there is that first sort of everything. Are you okay? Like M's like Vesper stuff. Here's the dude, her ex-boyfriend, or we thought was dead, washed up on shore. We did a DNA check. It's not him. And then we stopped talking about it for the rest of the movie until the end.
Yeah, and that's something that I have problems with as well, that whole plot point about the whole boyfriend thing that they're retconning, but we'll get to that when we get there. So after Bond kills this guy, he goes back to the safe house section, and he sees that Mr. White's gone, sees the puddle of blood, he realizes, okay, the guy's alive. We then cut to London, and Bond is arriving at this apartment where, I guess it's Mitchell's apartment. M's there, MI6 has got a whole team there, they're sweeping the place. She's like, man, this guy was my bodyguard for the last 5 years, he's been working for me for the last 8, how did we not know this? She gets really angry that Bond killed Mitchell instead of, saving him or saving him for interrogation, I should say. And for some reason, Bond doesn't try and defend that action. He doesn't say, hey, man, it was literally at the last second. It was never me. And he doesn't tell her these things throughout the movie, which is kind of weird, even though he can tell she's continually getting mad about what's happening. So they confiscate some money from him. We then cut back to MI6 headquarters. We find out that the money that he had is actually some of Le Chiffre's money that MI6 had been studying or following Le Chiffre's counterfeiting operations, which again begs the question, if you knew this guy was running a criminal conspiracy in the first movie, why didn't you just do literally what you were just trying to do with Mr. White, kidnap him and extradite him instead of doing this whole let's play the card game thing? But okay, that's another thing. So this is actually how I think they do fast pacing well, because you didn't have to go to Mitchell's apartment in the movie. We could have just cut straight to M's office and discuss. This is what we found. That's usually what happened in the old Bond movies too. You'd have like Bernard Lee as M sitting behind the desk. Bond would be there, and you'd have Tanner or somebody else updating him. This is what we found out from the information from the pre-title sequence. Blah blah blah. Instead, by going to Mitchell's apartment, and then by going to MI6 and actually having them walking through the halls and doing this big digital screen, we're looking at money. That's how you do fast paced well, because you're getting dialogue and exposition done, but it's because there's fluid movement to the camera. It's actually passing the time in a faster way that's not perhaps as dull as people sitting around talking in an office. And there was no shaky cam in this or fast cutting, which was nice. So that's my version of what I say he does good when it comes to that's how you do a fast paced well. But it doesn't last long, unfortunately. So they find out that this the money he paid to this guy named Slate, who's checked into a hotel in Haiti. So then Bond goes to Haiti, Port-au-Prince, Haiti to be specific. He goes into the hotel. He knows the guy's.
And as he enters the hotel room, he goes into a Bourne Identity movie.
He does. That's something else I think they were deliberately trying to emulate in this film. Same with all the digital screens I mentioned earlier. That was kind of immediately made me think of the third Bourne film, the Bourne Ultimatum, where they have that going on too. So Bond goes into room 325. He Slim Jims the door to get it open. And there's no reason for Mr. Slate to know exactly who Bond is, but his response, understandably, you would be kind of worried if somebody just suddenly broke into your room, but man, Slate just comes at him, and you have this really admittedly brutal fight.
Yeah.
Again,
it's a good fight.
It's a good fight. Not as much shaky cam as there was in the pre-title, which is good, but still not great. Bond ends up getting this shard of glass through Slate's neck, and then he also stabs him in like the thigh, which I'm guessing is the femoral artery, and Slate bleeds to death.
Mm.
Bond is disheveled, so he grabs Slate's black buttoned-up coat from the closet, puts it on, he takes his room key, he leaves, and then he stops just as he was about to step outside the hotel and gets an idea, and he goes up to the front desk and he asks if there's any messages. She's like, oh no, just the briefcase that was checked in for you. And he's like, oh, okay, so he takes this big metal briefcase. We see the cameo by Michael G. Wilson sitting there reading the paper. So unless this is the identical twin brother of the police chief that got arrested in Montenegro, then, ooh, funny, maybe there's a weird vortex. Okay, so anyway, Bond goes outside, and then Camille drives up. I'm guessing she must be taking the place out, because admittedly, if you didn't know what Bond and Slate looked like, they do bear a passing resemblance from afar. So she thinks this is the guy. She picks him up. She's like, yo, you're late.
Camille being a complete stranger, played by Olga Kurylenko. Yes. We don't know who she is. Just a lady pulls up in a car and says, get in. And and in a classic Bond thing, he's like, okay.
She wants to know what he's found out. He says, oh, I'm talking with Mr. White. She's like, I don't think I know him. And she asks for the information. So Bond opens the briefcase, and she pulls out these papers that are there, and she's flipping through it, and they're all blank. She's like, what the hell is this? And then Bond says with kind of a laugh, I think someone wants to kill you. And you see a picture of her with a gun sitting next to it. So clearly this is, I mean, obviously Bond's not the person she expected to meet, but clearly Mr. Slate is not the person she expected to meet either. So quickly pulls a gun on Bond. He stops her from shooting him, gets pushed out of the car, drives off. This guy in a motorcycle who had been kind of chasing him a bit pulls up with on Bond. He's like, you were supposed to shoot her. And he's like, oh, sorry. And he pulls the bike like right out of his hand, kicks the guy unconscious, takes his bike and follows them down to the dock. And this is either her being really stupid or really desperate, because she knows that this guy that we're about to meet just tried to have her killed. She sees armed gunmen standing around on the dock, but nah, she thinks it's a good idea to just kind of march right on in here.
Everything that happens at this dock is stupid.
Yes. So I didn't find here. So she goes in to meet the guy, and it's Dominic Green, played by Matthew Malrick. He's French, and he's making piano pressing, like for the player pianos when you have you're right. So he's pressing the stamp on the piano mix thing, and she's talking to him, and she's like, "Oh, it's trying to protect you. There was a leak, blah blah." And he calls her out on her bullshit. And he's like, "Yeah, I knew we shouldn't have slept together, and you being lying to me, it's unattractive, blah blah blah." He takes her outside to show her the actual person she was going to meet, a geologist who's dead, and he's threatens her, and he's like, I think you know why you're really here. You were only sleeping with me and hanging out just to get to General Medrano. And she's kind of worried at this. So you see Medrano show up in this speedboat, and he's like, oh, careful what you wish for. And he goes to talk to Medrano, and they have this almost cartoonish conversation where Medrano's standing like here, facing this way. Green is standing next to him, facing the other way, and they're talking, but we're not supposed to, I guess, whatever, it's really weird. So they're talking, find out that Green is basically organizing a coup d'etat in Bolivia and is going to install him as dictator, and has 26 countries ready to recognize them, and it's going to be fun. And he's like, well, in return, what do you want? And he says, what I want is this desert tract of land. Just like,
yeah.
Keep going from here.
Yeah. So anyway, as Dominic and the General are hanging out and they're talking to each other, Bond is watching from across the dock. And this is something that I'm sure that if you've watched any sort of review on Quantum of Solace, you've seen the meme about the guy pushing the broom in midair. And I had to look for it. It was not the most apparent thing in the world.
Yeah, I didn't notice it.
Well, you never really notice the guy in the background. It's sort of like on Star Trek when you see someone in the background just doing this. It's like, it's a weird piece of business that the internet latched onto. And I watched it again, like you, moments ago, and it didn't jump out, and I was looking for it. So Bond's watching Medrano and Green. And then so he goes over to the gate and says, that girl who was just in here, get her to call me, and gives his Universal Exports business card. which I thought, nice touch. Nice callback. It's a consistency throughout the franchise and all the Bonds.
Yeah, I thought that was actually kind of neat too, because it's really smart. So he gives the guy the business card. Elvis walks up, who's Dominic Green's cousin. He's like, "Who is that?" And he looks at. He's like, "Oh, he wants her to call him." So he picks up the business card. He sees a phone number. He dials it, and we see Bond checking his phone. And now he's got their number on a GPS tracker, which is really smart. And then Elvis criticizes the guard. He's like, "Pay attention next time." I'm like, "Well, you're the one who fucked up." So
worst haircut.
Yes. So Green tells Medrano after everything's gonna be fine. We're gonna pay off the right people, but oh yeah, here's this girl. Kill her when you're done with her. And he's like, okay. He goes to greet her in this really callous manner, mentioning that, oh, I believe we've met before. I've met your family. I believe, sadly, I'm the last one who've seen them alive. And he kisses her, and then they put her on the boat, and she goes with them. And she's kind of pretty calm as they're driving through the harbor. Bond decides that it's time to figure out what's going on because he hasn't heard any of this dialogue, and he knows it's bad and that she's in trouble. So he gets his dirt bike, and he drives over a couple boats until it crashes. He then steals a small motorized raft, takes off and kind of trails them. At first, it's a little slow, but then he deliberately rams it into the speedboat. And Camille takes this opportunity to try and kill Medrano with her gun. But Bond jumps up on the boat, kicks the gun out of her hand, knocks her on the speedboat, and she's like, "Take me back." And he's like, "No, I'll do that later." And he's like, "You're not one of Green's, are you?" And he's like, "What, Dominic?" Bond's like, "Dominic Green?" Because she had mentioned that name before. She ends up getting, she slips and falls on the boat deck, and they have this big boat chase. And again, fast-cutting.
Nonsensical.
Yeah. So it's this ridiculous boat chase because it's in a very rather populated harbor. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's not like you could easily, write this off. So Bond ends up escaping. He goes to the dock.
By doing something I absolutely do not understand. He throws up like a hook.
Right. It's like, I'm not sure how it works. Like he throws the hook on
the boat, and then the boat flips over. I don't know what happened.
So he goes to the dock, and despite the fact that Camille is arguably his best lead right now, he just dumps her in this guy's hands, and he's like, "Oh, she's seasick. She's still unconscious because she got hit in the head by one of the boats during this chase."
First time he drops off someone that he has, like, just, here you go. That's it. It's over. It's like, no, dude, you've been doing okay since.
He then casually steals this guy's car, starts driving through town, and he, because he has the tracking device on Elvis's phone, he's able to follow them to the small airport. He sees the plane. He then calls M, and he says, "I need a name check, Dominic Green." And they run it. They find out the guy's CEO of Green Planet, which opens all of these eco parks in various countries. And M decides to call. She's smart, and she decides to call the CIA. They immediately transfer her to the South American section chief when she'd asked about Dominic Green. And we cut to the inside of that private plane that Bond's spying on, and we see Felix, a recently demoted Felix, and Gregory Beam aboard this plane. And Greg's like, "Oh, so sorry." Played by David Harbour. He's playing like
I was gonna say
playing it like this total like frat boy, bougie kind of schmuck kind of guy. And he picks, "Yeah, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. We have no interest in Dominic Green." He hangs up. Tanner's gullible and thinks, "Oh, but ma'am, they didn't have any interest." And M's like, "You kidding? I mentioned his name, and they immediately transferred me to the South American chief. They're tracking him, obviously." So we're on the plane. Felix is sitting there with Gregory Beam, and Dominic Green and Elvis get on board. And Felix is obviously really pissed off. Now, understandably, because Felix totally botched the apprehend Le Chiffre thing, he's believably been demoted rather quickly. So he's bitter about that. He's bitter about the fact that they're willing to work with this guy Dominic Green, who's going to create this coup d'etat in Bolivia in exchange, presumably, for giving them oil. And Green is smart. He never explicitly admits that's what he's going to give him. He's like, "Well, if it's oil you want." And it's like, and Greg laughs at him. He's like, "Well, you can't buy that much piping without, alerting somebody. We know what you're doing. And what, you didn't find diamonds?" He's like, "Well, I'm not even admitting there's a find." And it's so obvious that Green's lying and he's not doing a good job at it, but Gregory Beam's an idiot, so he's not really picking up on it. And Felix, I think figures his boss is too stupid, so he's not going to fight it. But Dominic says, "I have a pest I need you to take care of for me." And he shows a picture of Bond. And Felix lies and says he doesn't know who it is, but Gregory Beam, for some reason, recognizes him immediately. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, don't worry, it's not going to be a problem." So the plane arrives in Bregenz, Austria. Green and Elvis leave. And Felix is really upset. And he's like, "You understand who Green is, and you want to put us in bed with him, right?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, Felix, you're right. We should just deal with nice people," which I thought was actually pretty funny.
It is quite funny, and it's a recurring theme throughout the movie.
Right, it is, because the whole world is running out of oil thing is apparently. Madrano, by the way, is also an idiot, because when Green said, I'm going to do this for you in exchange for this patch of desert, he's like, oh, you're not going to find oil there. Everybody else tried. But he stupidly thinks that Green's an idiot and doesn't have any suspicions about it. And so so they go off to Bregenz, Austria.
Yes.
Can you pick this up for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So we go to Bregenz, Austria. Green is going to Tosca. It's an opera. And Green goes into the opera, and everyone who's going into the opera, they get a gift bag. But if you are part of a special organization, you get a special gift bag, and it's got a little purple ribbon, and then you open it up, and it's got like an earpiece and a little Q thing, and everybody gets a Q pin, because if you're part of a super secret evil organization, what you want? A little pin that says that I'm part of this super secret organization. I shouldn't make fun of it. We've dealt with the Spectre rings before, but I thought this was a thing of the past. Anyway, so Bond sees the first person to get the purple gift basket, and so he follows him into the water closet. I love James Bond movies because it is the most prevalent use of the term water closet, and kills the guy, takes his bag, and then goes into the opera dressing room and steals a man who is built, and actually quite accurately built, just like Daniel Craig, and steals his tuxedo. So we have James Bond in a tuxedo.
It kind of bugged me too. I'm like, it's a perfect fit.
No, but did you see the guy? It looked like physically.
Yeah, I saw him. It kind of looks like him. Yeah,
like not facially, but his body was just like, yeah, no, that guy lifts.
And this place they're at, by the way, is where the opera Tosca is going to be happening. So that's why
Tosca. Thank you.
Yeah, Bond snuck into the back, and while they're all doing their costumes thing, and I admit I thought it was rather weird that all these Quantum members are meeting. I mean, it makes sense on the one hand because all of their assistants who probably do their schedules for them would find it suspicious if all of these, internationally connected, powerful people are meeting at a random place like they do in Spectre for no reason. But we'll get to that later. Yeah. But meeting in a public place makes sense, but not sitting amongst the general audience. I think it would have made more sense if they were in their own private boxes, separately that way talking. So they're having this conversation about they needed to divert funds for the Tierra project. Green needs 2,000 more kilometers of piping. He's like, oh, we'll divert it from our Siberian holdings. And like, well, what are we going to do when the CIA finds out we lied and, there is no oil? And one of the other guys is like, don't worry, I'm working on that. And Bond's listening very cogently to this whole thing. He's recording the conversation for MI6. And then one of the Quantum agents randomly mentions that maybe we should focus on the Canadian instead. And they're like, and Green's like, no, this is the world's most precious resource. We need to control as much of it as we can. So after Bond hears what he wants to hear, he interrupts and says, may I make an opinion? You people should really find another place to meet. And a lot of dumb Quantum agents decide to take this as a notion to get up and leave, and Bond takes all the pictures and forwards them to MI6. Mr. White
through a technology that could not possibly exist. He takes pictures of the back of their heads, and it recreates their entire skulls.
Yes, and Mr. White's smart because he doesn't actually fall for this. He stays seated. He takes his earpiece out and chucks it aside. He's like, well, Tosca isn't for everyone. And then you actually see Bond walk up the stairs as Mr. White is still watching the show. Mm-hmm. And that's the last time we see Mr. White in this movie.
Yes, it is.
Green is in a hurry to get out because he realizes they've been compromised. But he runs into Bond. And they have this tense kind of standoff. And this next scene admittedly doesn't make sense. Green thinks it's a good idea to seek his gunman on Bond in this very public place. It's not like they're wearing disguises or anything, and there's probably security cameras everywhere who will know who they came with. And interestingly enough, this whole next chase sequence is mostly, well, it's not silent, but you hear just the opera music. You don't really hear the sound effects.
Right.
I thought it was actually shot kind of interestingly. Kind of a neat scene. But again, it's not something that should really be happening. Green should be trying to, shimmy out the back and let this guy go. Bond ends up getting cornered by this one thug in particular. He disarms him on the roof. He's like, who are you working for? He's like, I'll piss off. He doesn't want to tell him. And so Bond kind of throws him off the roof. You could easily have stopped him from falling off if you wanted to, but he assumes that you're being a dick. I'm not going to bother. The guy falls down on Dominic's car, and Dominic's like, is he one of ours? His girl's like, no. Oh, man, he shouldn't be looking at me. Showing this guy's really dainty and just, that much of a snob. So his guard gets out and shoots the guy dead. They take off. Tanner has been watching all of this on the security feeds back at MI6. Maybe they have the same ability that Spectre does to watch everybody, I suppose, because Tanner's just able to watch everything. So he calls M, who's at home, and she's like got out of the bathtub or something. She's taking her makeup off, and he's like, yeah. So here's some photos. One guy owns a bunch of mines in Siberia. This other guy is Guy Haines, special envoy to the Prime Minister of Britain. And by the way, there's something else. Bond shot and killed a man from Special Branch and threw him off a roof. And so M's really pissed off and decides to call Bond immediately. He's like, did you get my information? And she's like, never mind that. Well, you killed somebody. He's like, yeah, well, I tried not to. She's like, well, he was from Special Branch. And this gives Bond pause. He kind of feels bad about this. But because he's flippant and says, I got to go because he has to follow the next lead, she decides that's it. She cancels all his passports, all his credit cards, everything, puts a lockdown on his movements. Green takes off in an airplane for Bolivia because he's still tracking them, presumably on the phone, so he knows where they're going. He goes up to the clerk at the airport, so he's going to buy like a ticket, and she runs his card and it doesn't work, and he's smart. He figures out why. So he's like, "Can you do me a favor? Somebody's going to call you in a minute. Can you tell him I went to Cairo?" And she's like, "Oh, I'd be happy to," because of this. Yeah. So then we cut to Talmone, Italy, which geographically actually isn't that far from against Austria, because Talmone is like way up in northern Italy, probably 50 miles or so from there. So I'm assuming that Bond just used his charms to sneak across the border, or just, he's a secret agent. He's Bond. He found a way to do it. He goes to the side villa.
Does it share a body of water? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
No, there's no body of water between Austria and Talmone.
My geography is terrible.
All right. So he shows up, and admittedly a huge continuity issue with the movie, Mathis is there, because apparently since he was innocent, MI6 bought him this villa, presumably paid in full, and you can tell it's been a while because his wife is kind of being flippant because he's trying to be rude to Bond and she doesn't really care, which means it doesn't make any sense because this is literally only a couple days after Bond told M not to release him from custody.
Yep.
And I can buy that Mathis, after a considerable length of time, would realize that, yeah, Vesper is being blackmailed, even though it is her fault. So I can buy that he might be nice enough to kind of feel bad about that, but it's been like 3 days, Yeah,
this is true.
And there's no reason for him to know that she and Bond were in love. So why does he care about, oh, Bond, you need to forgive her, which is kind of his whole shtick in this movie.
Yes.
Despite that, I really like the performance. He looks at the photos that Bond took, and he able to identify everybody. He's like, oh, you got some really nasty friends. And Bond asks if he could get him into Bolivia, and he's like, well, I used to know some people down there, was stationed there for a while. And he kind of reluctantly agrees to go. They take a plane, and I'm surprised that this is the first time in the franchise we've actually seen Bond in a minibar aboard an airplane. I never really thought about it before. But so he's on the plane. They can't sleep. They're talking at the bar, and Bond's kind of curious, and he says, why did you come with me? And he says, and Mathis is like, it takes something to admit you were wrong, because obviously Bond was very wrong. And he kind of forgives him. I actually really like this scene. It's kind of poignant. It's them kind of making up. Yeah, and then Mathis asks if he wants these pills, because apparently Mathis has pills for everything. So Mathis goes back to bed. They arrive in Bolivia, and for some reason, even though the whole point in Bond going to Mathis was to get bogus passports, and for some reason, MI6 knows he's here already.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that because
absolutely everything that happens on screen throughout this movie, it is known instantly by the people in charge.
The only thing I could think of is that because M knew Bond was following Green, she probably found out where his flight was going, and maybe that's why. But at this specific airport, even, she knows he was going to show up there, which is a little weird. So this woman shows up. Her name is Strawberry Fields, but you never hear the first name.
Is it in the credits? I didn't actually see.
I think it just says Fields.
Okay.
She's a redhead, and she's dressed in this weird coat, and the way she's wearing it, you can't see what she's wearing underneath it, so it almost looks like she's wearing nothing underneath it, and it looks really weird because they're in this really hot-aired country, and she's wearing this almost like 1950s trench coat type jacket, which is weird.
I thought, but also based on the character played by Gemma Arterton, I think that it is sort of a nod to her naivete in terms of her being like, she's a clerk at the embassy, and she's being sent to bring in an MI6 agent. And I think that she was actually dressing up, but the way that her whole image, it looks like she is she's wearing basically Uggs. She's wearing this Muppet News Flash trench coat, and she's got this distinctly red shock of Bob going on, and it's just I don't know how you could look like more obvious. I don't know. Anyway, not that she's a spy. Again, M brings that up later. But so we have strawberry fields forever.
Yeah, so she's like, you're going to come with me, and tomorrow we're going to, fly back to London. And he's like, oh, good. Bond's like, this gives us all night then. I actually kind of like this, that Bond's not even remotely bothered by this. He's like, oh, this gives us all night. It'll be fun. And then he's like, oh, you met Mathis, right? And she's like, I'm sorry, I don't really know him. And she's like, oh, see that Mathis only gone for a little bit, and they've already forgotten you. Which, of course, they would have an incentive to forget about him. So they get in a cab. They're driving along. Mathis is calling his friend, the old friend, the colonel, or the chief of police. He's talking to him, and he's like, oh, if I didn't have money, I wouldn't be here. Let's meet, and blah, blah, blah. And the cab driver, meanwhile, is having his own conversation about how his mom told him to buy a taxi and how he blames the water shortage on global warming, which is a tiny little tidbit, which actually is relevant to the plot. Of course, because it's not global warming that's causing it. So
yes,
we arrive at this really dingy, rundown like motel. Bond walks in and he takes one look at the place and he just turns around. He's like, no, and he's like, we're getting in the car. She's like, but we're teachers on sabbatical. This fits our cover. And he's like, no, it doesn't. Get in. She's like, no, get in. So they get back in the cab and they drive to this beautiful hotel. They walk up to the front and he's like, we're teachers on sabbatical and we've just won the lottery. And she kind of gives him a smile, which, you really shouldn't be doing if you're trying to stay undercover, because it's almost like you said, she's kind of naive to it, So the concierge shows them to their rooms. Mathis, I guess, has his own room, but Bond and Fields have their own. Bond goes into the side room. He's getting ready to get undressed or whatever. And she kind of smiles and is kind of, again, kind of young, naive type of, kind of funny laugh to it. Mathis knocks on the door later and Bond opens it. And Mathis is like, we've been invited to a party. And he's like, Bond's like, I wasn't aware we knew anybody down here. And he's like, okay, well, they're going to leave later or whatever. So he closes the door and then it immediately cuts to him after him and Fields have presumably had sex. He's kissing her. And she's like, oh, I'm so ashamed of myself. I can't believe I've done this. And he's like, do you want to go to a party? And he's like, oh, yeah, you must be furious. But you want to go to a party? She's like, a party? I have nothing to wear. He's like, oh, we'll do something about that. And I like that was kind of funny that they don't even bother showing him seducing her. It just cuts right to that because you knew that's where it was going.
There was a brief seduction. She's standing in like the living room of the suite, and when Bond goes in, the weirdest pickup line I have ever heard. Can you come help me find the stationery? No idea what that is supposed to mean. Don't know how that's an innuendo. Is it just because he's clumsy? Never mind. Anyway, they bang and they go to the party.
I think by stationery they mean like when you, like usually when you go in a hotel room, they have things you can fill out for your order. If you don't want to call the front desk, and you can slip it and hang it on your door, like for room stuff.
I thought it was just like the pad of paper that they leave on the desk,
There's
like
that
in the room. Anyway,
so they go to
I've never been to a hotel this nice.
Yes, so they go to the party. It's at the it's a Green Planet like a fundraiser. They actually went to an actual abandoned building for this, and it's actually really pretty, kind of interesting. And they had to do a lot of work to make it more structurally safe, which is funny because they actually used that in this scene. So Green's given this big speech about how the environment's been irreversibly damaged by like 70%, and with your donations, we hope that we could change that and make life better. And he sucks at giving the speech, which is kind of the point, because you could just see right through this guy. But then a bunch of people who presumably are powerful people with money walk up to him, are sucking up, and they're so happy. And this one guy asks him about the lack of drinking water in Bolivia, and he's like, well, the government cuts down the trees, and then the water washes all the soil out to sea. And then they act surprised. This guy's like, oh, I couldn't agree more, and he cuts him like this big check. But then
Camille shows up.
He shows up again, and she's like, oh, but didn't and she's kind of pretending to be drunk even though she's not, and she explains that that Green Planet sold some land to his logging company, after the government had sold it to them. And you actually see the guy who's going to cut him the check put his checkbook back in his pocket. It's a really quick shot. Elvis tries to talk to them to do damage control. And one of the guys, if you actually listen carefully, was voiced over by Guillermo del Toro, which is actually kind of funny.
Really? Okay.
Yes. The first guy's talking to him. You never see his face, but it was pretty funny. So he's walking. So Dominic is walking away with Camille. He's like, you just cost me quite a bit of money. And she's like, oh, well, integrity can't be bought for a price. He's like, well, I could try. And they walk over to the edge of this balcony, which has a bunch of cracks in it. Because, again, this is like an abandoned building. And she's like, oh, what, are you going to push me over? And he's like, well, you've been drinking. People can kind of believe it. She kind of flippantly laughs him off. But then he pushes really hard against it. And it actually almost budges. Bond shows up in the nick of time, and Green decides there's no point in beating around the bush, so he talks to him. He introduces them both. And Green's like, tells Camille, be careful with this one. He tells Bond to be careful with this one. She'll only go to bed with you if you have something she really wants. And he's like, oh, I'm sure, Mr. Green. And he's like, my friends call me Dominique. And Bond's like, I'm sure they do. And Green seems kind of offended by this. And it's like, well, what do you expect? You've already tried to kill him and have encounters. Why, whatever. So they Bond and Camille walk away, heading down the stairs. And Elvis is sent after them. And Dominique's kind of chiding them, saying, oh, yeah, you want this guy, what's the expression? Damaged goods? And Fields is actually paying attention. She's pretty smart. So she goes up the stairs and deliberately trips Elvis and makes it look like an accident. And then we see that horrible hair that he has is actually a hairpiece that comes off. Bond says to Camille, okay, now you're going to show me the Tierra Project. Mathis, meanwhile, has been off talking with the Colonel by himself, his old friend. And the Colonel, chief of police, whoever, has already told Bond, oh, you can have my entire police force at your disposal, And I'm pretty sure Bond was smart enough to know that wasn't the case. And we also saw Felix and Gregory Beam at the party, and Beam's like, come on, Felix, you're cramping my style. Because I guess Green just gave him invitations out of kindness or whatever, and Felix, of course, is still really pissed off about it. So Bond and Camille leave. No sooner than the valet gives them their car and they drive off, the cops start chasing them. They turn on their lights, they pull over, Bond gets out of the car, and the cops are like, papers, please. And he gives them something, they ask him to open the trunk, and Bond's like, why would you want me to do that? And we see Mathis, who's been beat up pretty badly. Cops pull their guns on Bond and order him to get Mathis out of the car. He does, but then they open fire, kill Mathis, mortally wounding Mathis. Obviously, they've been paid off by the cops to do that, by the Colonel guy to do this.
Right.
Bond kills both cops, and he's cradling Mathis on the street. And Camille kind of softly says that there's a hospital on the other side of town, but Mathis is like, no, he wants to stay. And rather than saying, tell my wife I love her or something, for some reason he's banging on about Vesper and how you need to forgive her. And Bond asks if Mathis was his cover name. He says yes. And Mathis dies, and he says, forgive her, she loved you. And he dies in his arms.
But he also says, there is a moment where he says to Bond, do we forgive each other? Because it was implied on the airplane bar, but this is the actual moment where it's like, there is a connection, which is very bizarre considering what happens right after Mathis perishes. James Bond unceremoniously picks up Mathis and throws him in a dumpster.
And they're having this really light piano music playing, and they're trying to make it sound poignant. And Camille's like, is that how you treat your friends? Yeah. Says he wouldn't care. And then to add insult as if that wasn't insulting enough, to add insult to injury, he pulls out Mathis's wallet and pilfers the money. And I don't know if the logic here was that...
One second. Did you just say pilfer?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So I don't know if the logic here was that Bond didn't want to leave him just lying in the street where he might get run over or what, because they're not going to take his body with them. But it was a little odd that, especially with the musical score, trying to make it sound so poignant. But it's like, okay, this is a great character you just introduced in the last movie. He could have been like the international version of Felix in these movies, and you've just killed him. So
well, but you see, and I've been trying to wrap my head around it, and I think that it's also like he is the Craig era Karim Bey in a certain way, and that is something that I appreciated about Mathis. And so when Mathis died, I was upset, but not surprised.
Oh yeah, I wasn't surprised either. Once he was taking him to Bolivia, and it was clear he wasn't really getting Bond much. Since again, Bond was still tracking Elvis's phone, so it's not like he really the only thing he needed Mathis for was the passports. There was literally no reason for Bond to bring Mathis with him. He's just like, oh, I know people, we can help. And it's like, you knew that wasn't going to happen. So they take off. Bond and Camille drive out to the desert where they buy a DC-3 or rent it from this guy. And she's like, oh, he's like, Bond's like, he wanted you, but I gave him the money instead, or I gave him the car instead. And she's like, oh, it must have been a lot. And he's like, no, he's going to make even more money when he sells us out. And sure enough, as Bond and Camille are taking off, you see the guy making the phone call. And once again, we see Bond is skilled at doing everything because he can fly a DC-3, which is pretty cool. So they're heading out into the desert. They come upon these sinkholes, and Bond asks, he's like, my sources tell you you're Bolivian Secret Service. And she doesn't really confirm it or not. And he's like, oh, you were just slept with Green to get in on this, didn't you? And she's like, what, you offended? And he's like, no, not in the least. Because it's like he feels he has a similar companion for this type of work. And she's about to tell him something. Oh, just for the record, I didn't. And then bam, 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 a military jet shows up and starts firing. We have another action scene, which is a little weird because obviously the jets chasing them are a lot more agile and maneuverable than this DC-3. But because of the quick cutting and the shaky cam, they make it look a lot more dramatic than what in reality it would actually be. Yeah. So I guess there's points for that. So they're fine. I know when the guy was flying this plane was Steve Hinton, who flies the Voodoo planes at the Reno Air Races. I met him. He's pretty cool. So he's flying like Bond's plane during this. So it was it was well shot, but again, because of all the shaky cam and the quick cuts, blah. So eventually their plane's engines get shot out by this jet. They're forced to jump out of the plane. Camille has the parachute. Bond doesn't have one, and this is some really bad CGI back projection of them falling through the sky. Bond actually looks legit afraid. He's like, "Come here, get over here," and he gets over to her, and she pulls the chute literally at the last second after they've fallen into the sinkhole, and
they die.
They should have. The chute opens just like literally 10 feet above the ground. It's ridiculous. It's a trope.
It is.
Other movies and stuff. So they land in there, and they're kind of walking along through these underground tunnels for a while. She ends up getting tired, and they're going to rest. We then cut back to MI6, or back to London, I should say. M has to go see the Foreign Secretary because she's since been told by Tanner that Bond is the main suspect in the shooting of 2 Bolivian police officers. And she's like, "Do you have anything else to give me?" He's like, "No, sorry." So she goes in there, and the Foreign Secretary is upset. And she's like, "Look, but we're on the verge of identifying this big organization." He's like, "That we've never even heard of." And he's like, "Look, Em, I hear you, but the world's running out of oil," which is why everybody's willing to turn a blind eye to this. And realistically, why if this were a classic formulaic Bond film, M never would have given him the mission to go after Green because realistically, given the politics of this, MI6 wouldn't care about a coup in Bolivia. It's only because he's following the breadcrumb trail and stumbling into this that this is even a plot in a Bond movie. Which I guess can get some points for that. So she's really upset, and the Foreign Secretary kind of cuts her a break a little bit. He's like, "Look, Bond's running wild, and you better bring him in, or the CIA is going to put him down." So then we cut back to Bolivia. Bond and Camille are like resting again, and he asks her, what is it you're in for? What is it the Green's got on you? And she's like, "It's not Green, it's Medrano." And she explains that her father used to be head of a military junta. He was a very cruel man, but he was my father. And one day the opposition sent Medrano to our house to kill him. And then Medrano did things to my mother and my sister before killing them right in front of me, and I was too young to be deemed a problem. And so she's like, "I've been dreaming of it forever." And Bond interrupts her.
Well, and don't forget, and then he burnt the house down.
Yes, and he burned the house down, which is why she has the burn marks kind of on her back.
Yes.
And Bond's like, "Oh, so when you were on the boat," she's like, "I waited all my life for that moment." And he apologizes, and he understands that because he himself was on a revenge mission. And so she's like, "What, did you lose someone too?" And he's like, "Yes," but he's not going to detail what it's about. So they get up and they're like, "Well, come on, we have to keep going." And these tunnels start turning into like mine shafts. You see how the boards are put up. So clearly there's something going on here. And Bond recognizes that some of this rock has been dynamited. And you see some stream. It's like, what's going on? So they climb up this one big mountain of dynamited rock, and they see a whole pool of water, of fresh water that's been dammed up from the dynamiting. And Bond realizes, oh, Green's not after the oil, he's after the water, because these are the subterranean water canals that provide 60% of the water for the country. So they get out, we go into this montage where Bond and Camille are trying to walk back to civilization. We see this very dirt poor village. They're running out of water. People are upset, and because there's no water, they have to board the bus and leave their homes. Kind of a nice scored scene.
It reminds me of Rango.
It does. And so Bond and Camille get on the bus. Nobody seems to be suspicious as to why these completely overdressed people are boarding the bus, but they do. They get back to civilization. They go back to the nice hotel they were staying at, and the concierge gives Bond a note. He's like, "Oh, your wife left this for you," and it says "run." And he shows that to her, and he tells her to wait outside. She's like, "Okay." So Bond goes upstairs, and the music is getting really tense. You're wondering what's about to happen, and he steps in, and it's just M and MI6 agents, and she's really upset with him. And he's like, what is it? What's this about? And he's like, "Well, it's about the oil." She's like, "No, Bond." And she's clearly knows something that he doesn't. He's trying to figure out what's really pissed her off enough to come all the way down to Bolivia. So she gestures to the other room. He goes in there, and in a Goldfinger tribute, you see Agent Fields lying dead across the bed covered in crude oil. Now, I admit, this is a really striking image, and excellent. Yes. And I think it looks even more striking than the Shirley Eaton, should I say. And Bond says, and she's like, M's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Green did it." Why? And he's like, "Oh, it's just misdirection." And she's like, gets really mad. And she's like, "No, why her? She had a desk job. Her job was to send you home. What the hell?" She's really pissed off. And he's like, and she doesn't want to hear Bond's explanation as to what's actually going on, because she kind of gets what the foreign secretary was saying, that the world is running out of oil. She's not going to win this fight. So she's like, Bond, it's kind of time for us to throw in the towel because of the CIA, blah, blah, blah. So she once again restricts all of his stuff, which she already did earlier, but she's just doing it again. She's like, you're going to go with these agents from Special Branch. They're going to take you back. No sooner than they get on the elevator, Bond takes these guys out. Doesn't kill them. He just knocks them all unconscious. He comes out of the elevator. He does this slick move where he jumps over the balcony and walks along the crown molding and ends up in front of M. And I guess she's so impressed by what happened. Bond's like, I got this. You don't need to worry about it. And he runs off. And Tanner's like, you want me to? And she's like, I don't. And he's like, well, the CIA's gonna. And she's like, I don't give a damn about the CIA. They're trumped up evidence. He's my agent, damn it. And I'm gonna. So it's like it just took a little bit of a reminder, I guess, for her to realize that, fuck this. I'm gonna let Bond do what he does best. So Bond goes outside.
Yeah, too fast to turn, and there's no reason to go down to Bolivia to be yelled at, and then they have a little bit of a spat, and then all of a sudden they're back in mom and son mode again.
Yes, so they go down. So Bond leaves the hotel. Camille drives up in a VW, which I'm guessing she stole from somebody. And then once again, she's like, "Get in!" Like they did last time. He's like, "Are you sure?" Which is not the time to be joking, because you got to get out of here, because M's other agents are going to be pissed. It's just like, get in. So they take off, and we cut to this other seedy little apartment where Felix and Gregory Beam are hanging out, and they're sitting around talking, and Felix is drinking from this water bottle, and Beam's like, "Yeah, you better not drink from that. It's probably got botulism in it." And he's like, "It's bottled water." He's like, "They probably bottled it from some creek right down the road with some kids peeing in it."
That's why I eat the peppers.
So the phone, yes, and so the phone rings. Felix answers it, and Bond's like, Felix, you really need to come up with better cover. I mean, the taxi driver told me that this is where the CIA hangs out, which I thought was the funniest joke in the movie. And so Greg's kind of interested because he knows that it's Bond on the line. And Bond suggests we should meet somewhere. Felix is like, okay. Greg's kind of happy. He's like, okay, here we go. We're going to get rid of this problem. So Bond meets Felix at this bar. And Felix is really cynical and trying to write off what's about to happen as, regimes change every week down here. Which is just him trying to rationalize the fact he knows he can't do anything to stop this. And just trying to make himself feel better about it, and even though he clearly doesn't feel good about it. And true enough, that's kind of the attitude of the rest of the world towards places like South America. Regimes change all the time, who cares? Which is kind of cool. And they have this little back and forth about how, Bond, that's kind of ironic of you to criticize us for doing this coming from a Brit, because British colonialism and all that. And he's like, well, how long? Right. He's like, how long do I have? He's like, well, 30 seconds. And you see Gregory Beam is sending in a whole SWAT team or Black Ops team, way too many people to deal with this. And Felix says that Medrano needs to pay off the right people in the army and the police in order to do this. Green's going to give him his money. They're meeting at this hotel called the Perla de Tunas out in the desert. And Bond kind of thanks Felix for it. And then he's like, James, move your ass. So the SWAT team guys show up. They open fire. Bond flees and gets away pretty easily. And Felix, like a badass, just sits there drinking the beer, not even bothered by the fact that everybody's running and ducking for cover. His bullets are flying everywhere. And the bartender's like, what the hell? And Felix is taking his drink. He walks back outside, and Greg's like, what happened? And he's like, well, we just told him what we agreed. I just told him what we agreed. Whatever they agreed to tell him, because I thought it was a setup to kill him. But okay. So then they leave, and that's the last time we see Felix and Gregory Beam in the movie. Yes. So Bond gets... Yeah, that's another thing. Twice in a row now, Felix kind of sort of departs. So he meets up with Camille again, and they're driving out to the Paris Las Dunas Hotel, which in reality is the hotel used for the European, or not the hotel, but the living quarters for the astronomers at the European Southern Observatory. And if the camera during the establishment tried to turn to the left, you would have seen all of the satellite dishes and all the other facilities. And they filmed the exteriors at this place in Bolivia, but the interior was completely redesigned at Pinewood to look better. The real place has a lot of concrete on the inside to help cool it off, whereas the inside looks much different. I absolutely love this location. It's one of my favorite locations in the Bond franchise. It's so cool looking and so unique. And in fact, the outside of the design is actually real. It's just crazy. So Bond is telling Camille about, have you ever killed anybody before? This is what it's going to be like. It's kind of tense. Green shows up, and he goes to meet Medrano and the chief, who mentions that the whole building runs on these, green
fuel cells.
Yeah, like fuel cells, which tells you that it's very flammable. So they go inside to hash out the deal. This waitress shows up to deliver a beer that Medrano ordered, and he's like, no, take it to my suite, please. She's like, okay. So Green shows up. He gives the police chief the money, and the colonel the money, and he's like, time to rid the country of this filthy corruption, or whatever. So he goes to leave, and then he's about to give Medrano the money, but Green's like, after you've signed over my land. And Green this whole time is like eating this green apple, and he's totally kicked back, kind of like this is just a blasé thing. So Medrano signs over the land without batting an eyelash. And he's like, okay, give me the money. And Green's like, oh, one more thing. Now you need you to sign this. He's like, what's this? He's like, well, as of this moment, we own 60% of your water supply. And so Medrano looks at the paperwork, and he's like, no, this is over double what we're paying now. And Green looks at it, he's like, oh, well, then don't sign it. Like, oh, but you should know that the people I represent, they work with the left or the right, the extremists and the pacifists. We don't really care who they are. And the fact is, if your predecessor had been more agreeable, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So if you doubt, you can either take the money and leave and not sign this, and you'll wake up tomorrow with your balls in your mouth. Or if you doubt that, you can just shoot me, take the money, and have a nice day. And I love this scene. The way he's saying it is actually really great, and it's intercut with Bond and Camille trying to sneak into the place. Yep. And Medrano's guard is putting his hand on his holster because he thinks that, the shit's about to go down. But Medrano thinks about it, and then he just decides, this guy's probably right. So he signs the paperwork. This guy takes his hand off the holster. Green gives him the briefcase of money, and Green and Elvis go to leave. Medrano goes back to his suite where he's tying up the waitress and about to rape her. Camille is listening outside. Yeah, Camille is listening outside. And the police chief is just pulling out of the garage. Meanwhile, Bond jumps down on top of the police chief's car on the hood of the car. And he's like, "You and I had a mutual friend." Shoots him dead. I wish I kind of got to see it. You couldn't really see that because of the glare on the windshield. You couldn't really see that the bullet actually went through and killed the guy, but it did. He then makes the decision to shoot the driver who had just put the car in reverse, meaning the car's going to keep going in reverse, crashes into the fuel cells, massive explosion, and the hotel's going to burn to the ground. Bond gets in a gunfight and takes out most of the guards. Green starts running like hell. And he kind of comically positions Elvis at this one spot. He's like, no, you stand here. And he pulls Elvis's hands up to the gun to make sure he knows to gesture the gun in this direction, which is really funny. He starts running. Another fuel cell blows up, and Elvis is incinerated. All the glass starts shattering. You have this neat slow-mo shot as Green's trying to get away from it. That leads into a big chase. Bond gets back up on the roof, and he's like firing at the glass through the door trying to get him. He falls through the glass skylight. Green immediately hits him with like this pole and starts fighting him. Green then uses this pole to break the glass where they have like an emergency like fire axe, and he starts going at it with Bond. And what's admittedly a really great fight. Actually shot pretty well because there wasn't too many cuts in this one. Explosions going off. Bond's trying to play defense. Camille, meanwhile, goes inside Medrano's suite and saves the girl. They're getting in a big fight, so they kind of.
No, she does not save the girl.
Well, she goes in.
She basically, the girl is screaming, and there is a little bit of an obscene upskirt going on just in the post rape thing that's going on, and then she starts to run away, and Camille is just like, "Get out of the way! I got some murdering to do." And so she goes.
I don't think Medrano would agree yet.
Well, no. Because she had just started screaming, and that's why Camille goes in. And then, but she's not checking corners to see whether Medrano is there.
But if she didn't go in there, Medrano would have, finished doing what he was doing.
Well, the entire reason she's there is to kill Medrano.
I know.
All right.
So they're fighting. Bond eventually gets the upper hand in his fight with Green and knocks him off the little ledge that they're fighting on. He's grabbing onto him by the hair, and rather than let him go and fall into the flames, he decides that, no, I'm going to restrain myself and actually save this guy for interrogation. But then we hear a loud gunshot. And, Green flippantly says, sounds like you just lost another one. And Bond's really pissed off, but he pulls him up and he's like, I can't. And he leaves him there for a second to go see what's going on. And then the camera cuts to seeing Medrano falling over dead. So Camille did shoot him dead. Bond goes in there to get her, but some debris falls and they're trapped. The flames are going there. And you have this really dark moment where Bond's about to shoot her and himself, telling her to, close your eyes. And it's like, oh, shit. But fortunately, this panel falls and we see another fuel cell and Bond shoots it. They're incredibly too close to this thing to survive, given how big this little explosion is when they shoot the thing.
My suspension of disbelief is gone. Although I would like to say that in the moment when the flames are coming up, it is almost reminiscent of the Vesper and Bond moment in the shower after the fight in the stairwell in Casino Royale, except instead of being covered in water, they're about to be, baptized with fire. And it is the same thing that happened. And Camille's sitting there, and I thought it was like really, touching, terrifying, however you want to frame it, with Camille sitting there going like, not like this, not like this. I don't want to. I can't do it like this. And then she echoes back the words to Bond, and it's just like, it'll be easy, take a breath, and it'll just happen. And then it is apparent that, Bond was going to shoot her. Close your eyes. I will shoot you in the head and then myself.
Yeah, so that's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Bree falls out of the way. He shoots the fuel cell, it blows. They go outside, and they see Dominic Green, who's kind of limping out to the desert, and it's not clear where he's going. Maybe there's a ridge that he hopes he can hide behind and assume Bond will take off or something. But so Green's taken off, and Bond tells Camille to wait here. We then cut to Bond's driving in the car way out in the middle of the desert. He pulls Green out of the trunk, and Green's like, I answered your questions. I told you what you wanted to know about quantum. And I can believe that he probably told him everything, because Green is enough of a sniveling little shit to do that.
Yep.
So Bond's like, yeah, of course you did, which means your friends are probably going to be looking for you. So he tosses him this can of motor oil, and he's like, bet you make it 20 miles before you consider drinking that. Goodbye, Mr. Green. And you have this great shot as Bond is just driving away, leaving him in the desert to die, which would have been a worthy death for him.
Mm-hmm.
So then we cut back to this train station somewhere where Bond is dropping off Camille, and she's like, I just don't know. Now that, Medrano's dead, now what? Which is, I guess, is the movie's way of having a poignant morals point about revenge and how it's not really all it's cracked up to be. And Bond's like, well, the dams will have to come down, and the, right people have to be, told about what's going on. And she's like, okay. And she's like, I think you're not going to get over this. You're not going to get over whatever your pain is for this woman. Your prison is in here, pointing towards his head. They share a goodbye kiss, and she walks off. Notably, the first leading lady in a Bond franchise whom he does not have sex with, which actually I thought was kind of neat. So she walks off, and we cut to Russia, Kazan, Russia, where Bond is going to meet Vesper's boyfriend, who turns out to be a quantum honeypot agent, which creates a whole other continuity issue in and of itself, because Le Chiffre only decided to have this casino game at the last second because Bond sabotaged his plot at the airport. And it's not like they would have known necessarily that Vesper would be the one. I'm assuming there's more than one Treasury agent or secretary. So what, did she fall in love with this guy in like a day when they kidnapped him? Or is this like maybe they deemed she was worthy of getting information on to begin with, and they'd already been dating for a while, and that's this guy's job to just go around the world doing this to different intelligence officers? Maybe. I don't know.
That's what it seemed like to me.
Okay, that's it. So Bond's waiting inside this guy's apartment, and he shows up with the Canadian, which the quantum agent had mentioned earlier. And he tells the guy to sit down. He pulls a gun on him, and he appeals to her by showing the necklace. They go, it's beautiful. My friend had one too. The Algerian love knot thing. So she quietly gets up and thanks Bond and steps out. And the guy's, he knows his number's up, and he's not even going to try and fight it. He's like, okay, just make it quick. So we cut outside. And once again, M is here on location, which doesn't really make sense. And Bond steps outside, and she's like, oh, is he still alive? And he's like, yes. He's like, oh, cool. So they send the agents in there to arrest the guy. And she says that, Dominic Green was found dead in the desert with a bullet in his head. And Bond's like, oh,
2 bullets.
2 bullets. And Bond's like, oh, it wasn't me. And she's like, oh, and your friend Felix got promoted to Gregory Beam's job. And Bond's like, oh, okay, so the right people kept their jobs. Because obviously, once they didn't get the oil they were promised, Gregory Beam would have been fired for that. And since Felix is like, oh, you didn't screw this up, Felix, we'll give you that position, which makes sense. So I'm guessing that's going to carry over into the new movie, because I get the feeling with Felix telling Bond in the trailer about Cuba and all that, he's probably still the section chief down there, which, if that's true, that's kind of cool. So Bond's like, okay, so the right people kept their jobs, and he's walking off, and M's like, Bond, I need you back. And he's like, bitch, I never left. And so he drops the Algerian love knot in the snow, and then it kind of fades to black, and then it does. Then they bring up the gun barrel, and when he shoots and the blood comes down, it kind of bleeds into the this fancy-looking cue for which and it starts spinning too, like a globe, like and then the title is there, and then we have the end of the movie.
Yes,
a lot of problems.
With full James Bond theme and everything.
So first of all, I don't think they should have named the organization Quantum. 1, because it's kind of dumb. 2, because Kevin McClory, who owned all the Spectre rights, died the week that Casino Royale came out. So they had always probably intended to approach his estate to buy it back at some point. But in that case, don't name this organization. Just have it be the continuation that Mr. White, like Le Chiffre was working for an unnamed organization in the first film. They should have just kept it that way in the second because it simplifies things for when we eventually get to the movie Spectre. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, it looks like some of the action in the film was very well choreographed, but because of the combination of shaky cam and fast cutting, you can't see what's going on. Like, I had to watch the movie several times on DVD to understand the logistics of, okay, how did this end up here? Like, what's going on? So that was a problem. Dominic Green, not really that impressive for a Bond villain. He's kind of, the smarmy, rich snob. And because they're trying to say that he and Le Chiffre are part of the same organization, to go from Le Chiffre to Green, it's not just that they're both mid-level guys, it's that Le Chiffre is a far better villain because of the way Nicholson plays him and everything. And Green is just kind of, smarmy and boring. But
I hate to keep falling back and harping on the writer's strike, but I think that it's probably that, and they would have punched up the villain during filming. And even in the Daniel Craig documentary, they talked about not going into the movie with a full script, and they were planning on sharpening things as they went because they were sort of married to the release date. But it is... 100%. Yeah, like I think I appreciate the less than megalomaniacal world domination villain, and it's grounded more for Craig, and so I don't mind. And I just know that a lot of people, they bash Matthew Almeric on this.
Well, no, I don't have any fault with him. I think he did fine for what they had, and I don't fault them because I understand all the problems they had with the writer's strike and all that. I'm just judging it as a final product. What do I think? For sure. So as a final product, I think they could have given him more to do because, as we alluded to before, he's a great actor. They didn't give him much to work with there. I do dispute this with a lot of Bond fans who keep complaining that the villain plot is stupid, the stakes are too low, this is who cares. And I'm thinking, the stakes seemed higher in this movie than in the last one, because in the last one, once Bond bankrupted Le Chiffre by sabotaging his terrorist plot, like I mentioned, they could have just kidnapped him right then and there. They didn't, but it works because it's a character study. So, and not to mention, once Bond killed Stephen Abano, again, the LRA is not very well internationally connected. So if Le Chiffre had won the game and made away with the money, he could probably just blow off the LRA and say, we're going to keep your money. Screw it, because your guys are, your bosses are dead now. So really the big stakes were gone in that movie pretty quick. Whereas in this movie, the stakes are that you're going to install this sadistically violent rapist pig as a dictator of this country. You're going to deprive a lot of the water from the most desperate, poor, bottom of the barrel, poor people who need it. And obviously, for a third world country like that, they get a lot of financial help from more successful countries, which is how they're going to be able to afford to pay the water rate. But Medrano strikes me as the type of person who's not going to sabotage his ambitions to, help out the people. Like even Green mentions that when he says, "Oh, look what we did to this country, Haiti." They elected a priest who raised the minimum wage from 38 cents to $1. Corporations got mad and they called us, and we facilitated the change. And you don't want another Marxist leader coming in and giving all the money away to the people, do you? So yeah, I say this is actually a pretty evil plot when you consider the fact that they're basically saying, "Oh, screw all the Bolivians." And I don't understand that criticism from the Bond community at large that say, "Oh, this is a dumb plot. It's just about water." It's like, well, if you look at the implications, yes, from Quantum's perspective, they're just trying to make money. It's a get-rich-quick scheme, just like was trying to make money in the last movie, another get-rich-quick scheme. Like, Le Chiffre doesn't care, and Quantum doesn't care, or Spectre doesn't care about the LRA and their delusional beliefs and unattainable beliefs, thankfully, nor do they care about the politics of Bolivia. They're just trying to make money. So in both instances, they're get-rich-quick schemes, but the thing is the implications of what happens if they succeed. So I actually think the stakes were much higher in this movie because Bond is essentially saving a whole country. And the reason the other 26 countries were going to officially recognize them is because of the whole, the world's running out of oil thing. And I would have been very interested, though, to find out what the contingency plan was when they hinted that what happens when the Americans find out we don't have oil. Oh, don't worry, I'm working on that. I wonder what that was. That would have been interesting to hear. But certain things I like. I love the locations. I love the sets. I love the color grading or the color palette of the movie. I like that the places look very real because I call Skyfall and Spectre postcard movies because you look at these gorgeous places and there's no tourists anywhere. There's no people. There's no garbage. Whereas you go to this movie, they literally hired just regular people to be extras in the background. Like the cab driver scene when they go to the cab, he is just a real cab driver that they just, hey, you want to be in the movie? And they're like, okay, sure. So that aspect of it I really liked because it felt very real and not artificial like Skyfall and Spectre to an extent. And again, I like the villain plot. I just feel that because the movie is so action driven, like things literally falling into Bond's lap. Like he goes to Haiti, he goes into this apartment, kills this guy, goes up to the desk. Oh, here's the suitcase. Oh, it's got this information in it. Oh, we're gonna. Oh, it's like he's not really having to work like a secret agent to attain this information for the most part.
Well, I was a little taken by that at the beginning, and I was like, he doesn't really do anything. But then, so White gets Guy to shoot everybody. Bond chases him. That takes him to anyway, the geologist and then when he goes back and says, are there any messages? And there are little things that he does, and it's like, yay, spy stuff. Like he is doing Bond things. And so when one lead sort of fizzles out, or when he kills his leads, he is sort of picking up the pieces around his chaos. And I did appreciate that. Again, I just think, like, I started off watching this movie and I gave up on trying to figure out the geography of action scenes based on my previous experience. And with that, I enjoyed the movie more. The plot makes a heck of a lot more sense because it's been, how many times have I seen? Probably 3, 4. This will be my 4th time seeing it, I think. And so I know that a lot of people crap all over it. And I think that it is a mistake for it to be denouement part 2 to Casino Royale. I think there are parts in this movie that are absolutely ridiculous and stupid, and I don't like them. But I think that more of the movie is good than is bad.
Yeah, I agree with that. I admit when I first saw the movie, I was very underwhelmed because I just had no idea it was going to be that style. And I was like, you mentioned Jason Bourne earlier, and it's like, yeah, it feels like it's trying to emulate Jason Bourne in more ways than one. And so it just kind of took me by surprise because not just in terms of the action style, but even the way Bond dresses, casual, the way the scenes are written, it just felt very Jason Bourne-y to me with all the digital screens and stuff, and you're constantly cutting all over the place, and they make a point of putting this fancy, neat font every time you go somewhere new, kind of like they do a bit in Bourne, where it makes it look like you're looking at a computer graphic. So It's like they're trying to do that kind of thing, which is a new style for Bond. And again, the fact that, true enough, this is the only way Bond would be able to investigate this particular plot, because again, the Britain wouldn't care about, knocking over a gun garage. So I think there's more to like than dislike. It is still jarring because of the editing at times and the choreography of the action scenes. But once you think about it put together, I actually do think it's a pretty fun movie. I think it's the best way to kill time. I mean, it's that hour for. I mean, Forster wasn't kidding when he says this thing's going to unfold go out like a speeding bullet, and it is. It's the best. Yeah, so I use it to kill time quite a lot, actually. And it's a good popcorn movie, I think. Really good popcorn movie. So I can't knock it all the way. I mean, yeah, I didn't really. I think they could have used Camille's character a bit more because it's like, when he dumped her off at the dock and then she just randomly shows up at the party later in the movie, and he's like, "Okay, you show me this." He's like, "Yeah, you probably should have asked her these questions back when you first met her at the dock, stupid."
Instead of just dropping her off.
Yeah, and then the fact that they killed Mathis in that way, it's like, yeah, you saw it coming, but I just didn't like that they did that because the fun about a Karen Bay character is like, man, wouldn't it have been cool if he could have showed up in more movies if he didn't get killed off? I mean, granted, there wouldn't have been much logic to it because Karen Bay was supposed to be, the section chief in Turkey, so you wouldn't really find many good excuses to take him all around the world. But I think with Mathis being retired and still having all of his nice connections, they could have used more of that in the franchise. But they didn't. Felix also, I like the performance because he's trying to really stand on his morals and he doesn't feel good about what he's doing, but he is kind of a sourpuss throughout. And it makes sense again for the story. I just didn't, like, even in Casino Royale, I didn't feel Felix get his moment to shine, so to speak. It's like he has a lot of dialogue in the first movie, but he's kind of, losing at cards constantly, and then he gets totally, blown out by the sheep. So I was kind of waiting for Felix to have a really great moment, and which is why I thought it would have been nice if we got a scene towards the end of Gregory Beam getting fired and Felix getting the promotion. Like, let's see that actually happen,
Gotta write it. Gotta pay the writer to write it.
How difficult would it have been? Like, they're sitting on the plane, they arrive at the...
Gab!
Yeah, so I don't hate this movie. I don't think it's the worst of the Craig era. I do quite enjoy it. It does stylistically feel closer to Casino Royale in terms of the color palette and the color grading than Skyfall and Spectre, but Yeah. So what do you give this one, Scott? Or do you have anything else to say about it?
Just one more thing to say about this, and it is Another Way to Die by Jack White and Alicia Keys.
I completely forgot. See, that's how forgettable this song is. I completely forgot to mention it.
I like it.
Really?
It's better than Spectre. The Writings on the Wall. That song is toilet water.
I like the lyrics to Writings. I still don't know all the lyrics to this song in Quantum of Solace, Another Way to Die, because I can't understand what he's saying most of the time.
It's almost like it is like revisiting Quantum of Solace itself. Is that I did not like the song when I first heard it, but it's better than drinking out of a dog bowl, which is Writings on the Wall.
That's true. I was enjoying Writings on the Wall up until he starts doing the falsetto.
The falsetto, yeah.
Like I mentioned before, I think that there were some pretty good cover versions of that song that came out within days of them releasing the Sam Smith version. But we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yes. But yeah, and also the opening title credit with the sand and everything. And it was it sort of evolved from just Daniel Craig, or the representation of Daniel Craig, You Know My Name, and which was obviously a reintroduction of James Bond himself. But with the opening credits, sort of the way that it was artistically designed, it was titillating, but also fitting with the theme of the movie, and also with Daniel Craig being front and center, which is what it has been throughout. I think that's going to be a staple in James Bond movies forever now. We're not going to have anything that's going to be just sort of representative. It's always going to have the actor in those credits.
Yeah, and I think it's also going to, from now on, that it's going to have more relevance to what the movie's actually about. Like in Casino Royale, it's all styled like Cards, a casino, because that's the centerpiece of the movie, and Quantum, all about the desert, and because of the drought and all that. And we'll get to the ones for Skyfall and Spectre, all the stuff that they do, and I expect that to continue in the next one. This was done by MK12. This is the first and only time they've done one. I mean, I didn't think it was bad, but the song, admittedly, it wasn't a bad song. Admittedly, it didn't feel as much like a Bond song to me. It felt like something I would be more likely to hear on the radio if I were to, because you don't really hear Bond songs on the radio that much, like if at all. But this one kind of sounded more like something I'd hear on the radio. But and I thought, when I said Jack White and Alicia Keys, I'm like, that's an interesting duet. I've never heard one. But
well, and I didn't like the off-key sort of way, but and even they incorporate the theme into the movie proper as well. There are sort of cues to it, and also you don't get a full-on throughout the movie, but you do get sort of hints. You get a soupçon of James Bond themes.
You don't really get the classic theme until the very end of the movie when they play the gun barrel logo, and then they into this really nice, the music by David Arnold, the tunes for the main, and it's the credits also. I believe this is one of the first time in a long time for a Bond movie where you don't just have it on black. It has like the desert, and it's like in a red color filter as the lines, which is kind of interesting. And I like that music bit a lot as well. So yeah, I also, by the way, assumed that the Quantum story was over at this point. I figured that whatever Green told him is what he needed to know, and that, okay, he told him everything, and because MI6 already has those other guys' photos, including the envoy to the Prime Minister, that means they're kind of done. And there was a deleted scene, by the way, which they filmed, where Mr. White goes to kill Guy Haines because he's been compromised, and I believe Mr. White ends up getting killed in that scene as well. I can't remember. I've never actually seen it. They repurposed it for the video game that came out in 2008, but the scene itself has never been officially released in any capacity. And I guess I'm not sure what the thinking was of deleting it, because obviously they weren't planning the Spectre movie this early. So it is kind of odd, because it would have been a nice way to put a bow on that portion of the story, at least. Because that did seem weird, because not only is Guy Haines emphasized during the Tosca opera scene, but Mathis mentions him directly. He's like, "Oh, Guy Haines." Like, they play this guy up, and then you never actually, it doesn't really have a resolution. It's just, they never come back to him, and they never will. So it is kind of odd that they cut that scene. But at the time, once again, like with Casino Royale, and I thought, okay, that they're done with this storyline. With Quantum of Solace, I thought, okay, they're done with the storyline. I'm fine with that. We can move on now. Yeah.
But we will see. Well, and then I guess we've said Jack White and Alicia Keys. Are there any final thoughts before we go and see the fine people in the chat?
No, I guess we have to give it our ratings now.
Okay, you go first.
First, I'm going to give it. Okay, because I like it's a good way to kill time, and I still enjoy the story. And I'm going to give it 7 martinis.
Whoa, lady, Jesus, heavens! All right. See, I'm starting to think we're several movies in at this point. There are going to be a long list of movies that we're going to see, and at a certain point, like we've been watching some good James Bond movies. And I think I gave You Only Live Twice. Didn't I give it like a 4 or a 5?
You did.
And so I gotta, if You Only Live Twice is a 4, this one I gotta give this one a 3. There are ones that are worse than this, but not many. And I don't want to drop to a 2 quite yet. I don't think it's a 2. 2 is well, maybe I would. I don't know.
I can't lie about the fact that I've seen this movie several times.
Mm-hmm.
I do find it's a great way to kill time. I think it's a great popcorn movie. And so for those reasons, I gave it kind of a higher rating. But I don't know, maybe if I'm rating it against Bond films in general, maybe I should do that.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm sort of doing, because I'm keeping in mind we're going to be held accountable. We're going to have to go back through these videos and find out what we rated them. I don't have a tally yet. In
that case, I guess I'd give it a 6.
Wow, still very high. Like if you were to, never mind. I can't. Well, no, it's up to you. It's your rating. I'm not your real mom.
The reason I gave From Russia with Love a 6 is because they tell you the whole plot of the movie in like the first 10 minutes, and then it's kind of like you're waiting for Bond to play catch up, and it takes way too long.
Right.
This movie, they do hint at what the plot is early on when he talks about, we're going to do this coup, blah blah blah. But I'm kind of wondering where it's going, but I still really enjoyed it. But admittedly, and that's another thing I forgot, the continuity with Mathis makes no sense. The fact that he cares so much about Vesper makes no sense. It's like, oh, we need somebody to name what the theme and the message is of this movie. I don't know, we'll pick Mathis.
Well, and things sort of just drop in. There's a scene that represents, okay, this is what we're doing, and it is strung along. There are parts, and Green is good as a mid-level management villain, but he's not, in comparison to other other villains, he doesn't stack up really as a Bond villain. I'm totally on board with the plan. The plan has never been underwhelming to me. It makes about as much sense as irradiating all the gold in Fort Knox, as far as I'm concerned. And but it falls when it gets dumb. There's just stuff that doesn't make, and a lot of it has to do with the geography of the action scenes, and also because no one really had a through line for the story. I do find Daniel Craig to be probably 60% flat, 40% engaging.
Yeah.
So I'm giving it a 3.
Maybe I should give it a lower rating. I'm thinking, that's true, because as a regular movie I would watch, I would probably give it a 7, which would be like a C. But
sure.
For a Bond movie, I would probably give it. I'm still gonna give it a 6. I'll give this one a 6.
Okay, then there we have it. It's 6 from Kat and 3 from me. Let's see what the chat has to say. Edge of Time, ahoy, agents! Ahoy, Edge of Time. Good to see you or read you. Tom Jr. Jackson, how you doing, Tom? Well. It's another episode of Martinis, Gadgets, Guns, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Can't wait for the food talk. Ahoy, captains.
Oh, you better bring us some of that food.
Tom says, this Max Headroom cosplayer, we'll call him Scotty, for safety reasons, seems to know his Bond this week. Thank goodness. And he is wearing clothes this week. Congrats. Hey, Tom, go fuck yourself. We'll call it square. Tom says that opening car scene in Quantum of Solace was great, and just to find out that Mr. White was in the trunk the whole time, but making it a direct sequel to Casino Royale was an interesting choice. And Kat, you brought up an interesting point. I never realized the timeline with Mathis doesn't make any sense. I've seen it 4 times. I never pieced that together. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Tom says, but it also, to me, and this is just my opinion, it felt almost like another chapter of a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does, yeah.
Captain Deckard Spock. I wish I had anything left. Cheers. Tom Jr. Jackson, Catherine, your meticulous details that you discuss are on point and just like a masterclass in Bond.
Thank you.
That's why I have so much fun doing this. Gundel Whittlebaum, how are you, my friend? Worst Bond movie ever. It is a sad attempt to cash in on the Jason Bourne-styled action movies of the same period. It's worse than Diamonds Are Forever, and we all know how bad that colostomy bag is. Yeah, and when I was thinking about other James Bond movies that I'm gonna have to rate this up against, I was thinking about Diamonds Are Forever and Die Another Day. Tom says the beauty of Casino Royale is that you get through the whole film to hear him say Bond, James Bond, and it feels it is earned at that point just to hear him say that. Agreed.
Exactly.
Tom says, yeah, David Harbour was very cringy with his performance when you first meet him in this film. I was fine with him. I thought he was good.
It's the character, but admittedly, it does almost feel like they're hinging on cartoon a little bit.
He was a little bit of a frat house pothead. You're right. In the performance. Tom says, yeah, I've noticed that M has a rather short fuse with Bond in the film and subsequently in Skyfall as well. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves with that info. Well, you started it, Tom. And if Bond had his way, we would love Strawberry Fields Forever. Well, he did. For a part-time lover. Tom says, one of the tropes in a Bond film, luscious views that you can't take your eyes of. Well, yeah, eyes off of, pardon me. Tom says, that's totally my new pickup line. Can you help me find the stationery? Yep. Where did you meet your wife? At Staples. Tom says, Bond left Mathis in the dumpster, specially marked for Dieter the Trash Panda. Our friend Dieter the Trash Panda from Let's Get Physical Media on Sundays. Tom says, but honestly, Tom, thank you. Tom, honestly, I found that to be an odd way to put Mathis' body out of the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, Kat, when you were like, they tried to make it poignant, and it just was, I don't know. Anyway, Tom says, I mean, the two scenes that stand out for me in Quantum of Solace is the giant eye in the opera scene and the ending where the villain whose name escapes. Dominic Green, yeah. Oh, and Elvis. Elvis is also iconic. Elvis seems like a sidekick from, or like a henchman from a Brosnan flick. Tom says, whose name escapes me is told to walk through the desert and I think he tells Green to drink the oil.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. This is a great series on the Craig era of Bond. Well, thank you, Kat. That's mostly your knowledge and insight. It's great. Tom says it's a great popcorn movie. And I can't argue with that. If this was held up against other action movies, I would this is better than Fast and the Furious, like the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to think about it. Maybe I should give it a 5.
Tom says my two favorite Bond songs are Skyfall and Live and Let Die. Can't argue. I'd have to think about it more, but I cannot argue. We haven't listed them yet. Have we done the songs?
No.
No, not yet, but we will. I'm sure we will. Dam's here. Hey, Dam. This might sound weird, but I find the Daniel Craig movies similar to the weird PlayStation games like Nightfire and Agent Under Fire. They feel like weak video game storyline in my opinion. I can see that for Quantum and possibly for Spectre, but Casino Royale and Skyfall, I think, are more character driven and a little bit more thoughtful than, say, GoldenEye for N64. Although Agent Under Fire, Blood Diamond, those kinds of things.
All right. Anyway, you're right. In that case, I'm going to make this one a 5. I was thinking about it some more, and it's like, yeah, I enjoy it as a popcorn movie, in which I give it a 7, which is like a C because it's a popcorn movie.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's a Bond movie, and all my criticisms and the excessive amount of action and the front loaded with action, then I give it like a 5. Okay.
And Tom finishes up us up on the chat. Yeah, but Fast and the Furious has something that Bond doesn't. Family. Ha ha ha. Oh, wait till we get there. It happens when the Scooby Gang gets together. We haven't even seen anybody. We don't have a money penny. We don't have a queue yet, but that's all coming. Dam says, also, Scotty, congrats on the great news lately. Celebratory martinis all around. Oh, my stars. I cannot wait. I am back to drinking on weekends only. So anyway, well, no, it's actually beneficial for everyone.
Well for the show.
I'm sorry?
That'll do well for the show.
Probably. Yep. Makes sense. I don't even remember. I don't even know.
Exactly.
I have to go back and watch. It's fun to have actual documents of what you did last Wednesday. Anyway, that does it for this week for Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. We will return next week with Skyfall as we keep on trucking towards No Time to Die. You have your tickets, Kat?
I have my IMAX tickets for Friday, October 8th at 12:30. And just a reminder, we're going to have a special episode of Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns, likely Saturday, October 9th, where we'll do both a non-spoiler and spoiler review of the film.
Agreed. I can't wait. I am looking forward to it, and the proof being in my brain. I'm jazzed. So thank you once again. Kat, thank you as always for being the most knowledgeable person on the northern hemisphere in regards to James Bond. I don't know how you retain so much. It's incredible.
Thank you.
And I am Scott. We'll see you next week. And have a good night, everybody. See ya.
See ya.